left-hand side watching the jungle for any sign of life, and nothing. So we get unnerved, and they say, no, we're not quite there yet. And again, they're hitting the jungle like a tackling dummy. And so that set up the three more approaches into this area that we were in. Again, it was on the side slope, and Clyde had to hold it in a modified hover. You could let the weight off just a little bit, but if he let it down, it would sink into the mud. And we saw this circle of people tightening around us, and now you could see where you could just see figures running before. Now you could discern features in the figures. And fortunately, the rice dikes were there, and they were running a crisscross pattern. You know, they couldn't run directly at us. They would run 90 degrees one way. It's like tacking in a sailboat, essentially. And Bruce Dallas was shooting back with the M60 to try and slow him down a little bit. And Don West and I were watching the jungle. And Zeke and Klaus said, nope, can't do it. Came back another time, nope, we're still not there. And so the third time we were back there. Now, I think this is the fifth time we've landed in this same rice paddy, and people know where we're going to be by this time. And Bruce Dallas says we're taking fire from our 6 o'clock. There was somebody coming up the tail back, and he couldn't turn his M60 far enough. Well, the H2 had this little skinny profile, narrow thing. It didn't sit wide, so that was pretty safe there. I mean, they would have to be a good shot to hit us on a run coming from that direction. And about this time, we saw the two figures, two dark pajama-clad figures, burst out of the jungle and start running towards us. And I told Don, I said, you watch him. If you see a muzzle flash, you start shooting. And unfortunately, it was Claw and Burns in their flight suit. They weren't pajama, but at that distance, you couldn't tell. And they came running across. The last time we came into the approach, we lost our parachute flares again. Everything went black we were coming through at about 150 feet, descending, slowing back through 60 knots. And on the collective, there are two switches that control the lights, and Clyde just flipped them all on. We had spotlight going, the hover spot went straight down. We had nose floods going out to the right. And there we sat, waiting for these people, surrounded by this halo of light, just illuminated us at a target. Prior to this time, the H2 had a dark gray paint scheme, just like your tape box. And we were on a moonless night. And I'm convinced that's what saved us, because they couldn't see us. They were shooting at a sound, and when they shoot at a sound, it's like trying to shoot a flock of geese where they are. I mean, you have to lead them, and the people on the ground had no idea where we were. I mean, they could hear the noise, but I know they didn't know where we were, and that saved them. But here we were sitting surrounded in this light, lit up like I told Clyde, like a cruise ship, down in the Caribbean. And that's much of the light that we were watching Zeke and Claw come at us. And they looked at the light and they say, we're not going to run into that light and get shot. I mean, we've been in the dark. And even though Zeke Burns had the broken ankle, he beat Claw to the aircraft, to the helicopter. They came around. And why Bruce Dallas did this, I don't know. When we said they're coming out of the jungle, he got out of the aircraft, walked around the front of the aircraft, and looked around to see who was coming. And Clyde looked down and says, and he's still connected to his ICS cord, the intercom system, and Clyde looked down to the right and said, Dallas, what the expletive deleted, are you doing out there? Get back in the aircraft. And so about the time Bruce Dallas got back in the aircraft, John Burns rounded the aircraft and started coming in. Now the deck of the aircraft, the H-2, is probably, I don't know, less than 3 feet above the ground, maybe about that. And so there was a step on the main landing gear as you went down, and whether Burns missed the step or I don't know, but Bruce Dallas grabbed him by the seat of the pants and with one hand threw him into the back of the aircraft. And about 10 seconds later, John Holtzclaw entered the same way, inverted and up position, just threw him. And the signal was that anytime you for the air crewman to tell the pilot that they were ready to leave, that the survivors were on board, was to tap the pilot on the shoulder. Well, Clyde said Bruce almost knocked him out of the seat, even though he was strapped in. So there we go. We took off. And the one comment about it is, as John and Zeke and Claw rounded the nose of the aircraft, we started taking fire from the jungle right where they had come out. The people were that close behind them. And in fact, we learned later that as they were getting to that jungle edge, the guys were, again, 10, 15 feet behind them, shooting at them, and didn't hit them. They could hear the bullets whistling past them and thwacking the ground and the leaves around them. And so they had a lot of incentive to not stay there very much longer. And so as we broke cover and made a very rapid climb out, and headed for the beach, and you know, Don West and Bruce Dallas were both using their M60s to shoot back at the people on the ground. John Holtzclaw had his survival radio on, and it was locked on that distress signal going pew, 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 blocking out all transmissions inside the aircraft and outside the aircraft. We could not hear the people on the ship, and now we're getting pretty low on fuel at this time, and couldn't hear anything from the aircraft overhead because it was just so powerful, it just blocked everything else. And Clyde screamed through the cockpit into the cabin. He says, "I don't care if you have to strip him naked, get that damn radio and get rid of it." And so when it got that turned off, by this time we had flown up farther north than we wanted to be, and the only way to the ship was a straight line right across some heavy anti-aircraft artillery, shore batteries again. And as we were going through about 1,000 feet and accelerating through about 80, 90 knots, Bruce Dallas slid the cargo door open, or closed on that, and it disappeared. It had been hit, it got damaged by the tree, and it just flew out of his hand and went fluttering down to become a trinket for some North Vietnamese rice paddy farmer. Well, the significance of that is, without the door closed, you have more drag, you use more fuel, you don't go as fast. But we pulled out of there at about 120 knots, which is red line airspeed for the H-2. And we were climbing up, and we went, fortunately, the Jewett, which is the ship we landed on, had broken standing practice and had closed the beach within the 12-mile range. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made it. Because as we were climbing out, we got the 20-minute fuel light, and we had about 25 minutes of flight to get to the ship, normally. And Clyde had said while we were flying around in the night, he says, "We're going to stay here until we have just enough fuel to get feet wet ourselves. And then we'll leave, but not before, you know, unless we pick them up, of course." And so as we crossed the beach line, I could see down with the lights of Vin to the south of us, I could see a little bit of a horizon in the haze, and it looked like somebody had taken a bunch of flaming arrows and threw it at us. And there was a bit of a horizon, and any pilot who flies knows that if it's on the horizon, it's at your level. And so I scared Clyde for the second time that night, and I screamed at him, "Get down," and I hit the collective, and we dropped about 500 feet in 5 seconds, and whatever it was that was sent up at us burst probably a mile, a half mile, a quarter mile away. So it didn't, and then we got back up, and as we said, we made an uneventful landing. Clyde did an excellent job. We landed with somewhere between 5 and 8 minutes of fuel in the tank, indicated. Never once were we hit. All that shooting, we were